Hey, Harry, thank you for coming in. You definitely have a great background. You've done a lot across entrepreneurship and founding companies and healthcare and so on. It's just amazing what you're contributing, continue to do worldwide. So thank you for coming in and sharing experiences with my audience.
Steph, thank you so much for having me on the show. I mean, it's been great talking to you, getting to know you, and I'm really happy to be here.
So, Harry, you know, you've got this remarkable career. You're definitely influential, very, very successful, decades and decades of building successful ventures throughout the world. And, you're known in life sciences, healthcare, diagnostics, healthcare, IT, the convergence of all of these. You speak, you're in the media. You definitely are influential, including with your patents and telecommunications and more. What were the inflection points in your life, and let's say three, that made this wonderful career that you have today? And it could have been when you were 3 or 5 or 10, inside, outside the family, could have been career moves. But what were those magic moments that really shaped you today?
Oh, I mean, I guess if I go back far enough, I mean, my dad died when I was around 8, so that was a major earth-shattering sort of, directional change. Probably the second one was I got a job with a family friend, and at that time, he was teaching computer courses, and I was 19, so that was a while back. That was before the 8086, right? So we were actually like building PCs from scratch at the time, and I learned a lot from him, just a lot on how to manage, run, interact with people, etc. Um, and then I would say the third was when I graduated from college, and it was the early 90s, and the country was in a recession, and I couldn't find, I mean, it took me forever to get my first job. And that I swore I would never be in that dynamic again. And it sort of changed how aggressive I was at that point. So I would, if I went back earlier in my life, those would be probably the three big ones.
It's interesting. You indicated your father passing away, and that would be a major, inflection point, right? Especially at such a young age. And then you get exposed to computers, and this is a pre-86, did you say? So that's
Yeah.
early. Because
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
so you're talking like a CPM, I guess, or CPM 86 or something like that, right? Before dawn.
Yeah. I mean, we had, like terminals that we were setting up for people to actually like get some work done on. I mean, that was the extent of it. And then I remember when we built the first portable I mean, it weighed a ton, but we built it from scratch. And then that's how I got familiar with, um, building and operating PCs at the time.
Yeah, I mean those are really, really early days of getting that kind of background. And then, of course, um, you got your MBA from Boston University and your bachelor's from San Francisco State University. Well, let's even go back further. In high school, were you interested in things like science or tech in any way, or what were the dominant sort of things that took your interest in those early days?
Science? Nah, well, kind of. I think it was more like my early years of college where I really started bending in that direction of trying to figure out what I wanted to do and what I liked. I liked the technology. I really enjoyed, because I was a biology major. I really enjoyed the biological sciences, and the irony was I thought I was going to work in a lab when I got my first job, and I ended up being in the sales and marketing side of things. And I think that just happened because like I just wanted a job. I didn't care what it was at the time. I just wanted to get in there and start working.
And so you have this situation where you got jobs in sales, so, but that would help be helpful, right? As an entrepreneur, ultimately.
Yes, but at the time, I swear I was like, "Oh my god, what am I going to do? I've never sold anything. I gotta figure this out, right?" And so I just sort of I winged it. And it was funny because I was born and raised in San Francisco, and I remember people at work going, "Are you from New York? Because like you're super aggressive the way that you're like, are you from the Bronx?" And I was like, "No, I was actually born in San Francisco." So I think it just really came down to never wanted to be in the situation where you wouldn't be employable or really wanted to be productive and never wanted to worry about being in that situation again. So just went out there and did what needed to be done at the time.
So let's actually look at your career arc then. I mean, you got your degrees. It's a hard time finding a job, and then you end up getting employed, and you're just kind of, it shocks you, right? You're thinking,
Yeah.
I don't want to be in that position again, or something to that effect, right? And yet you had early PC experience, even pre 886, which is pretty rules. And then what led you to, and you had an interest in healthcare, things like that. So what made you an entrepreneur? What made you think of being entrepreneurial?
I think I was, well, I always had that, I always wanted to own my own business in the sense of, I mean, I started, we used to DJ when we were like 16 and, of course, get paid for it. And then even when I was working for the gentleman I told you about, I started building PCs and selling them on the side. So always trying to do the entrepreneurial thing until I got into corporate. And even when I worked in my first corporate job, we ran a nightclub at night during the summer south of Market in the city. And so constantly trying to do something entrepreneurial. But it wasn't until after I left Applied Biosystems that I started my consulting firm. And that was what really took off. I had a lab before that, but that was mediocrely successful, not as successful as I would have liked. But after Applied Biosystems was when, and again, it was one of those pressure moments. I left we were having our second child. He was born, we bought a new house, and now I'm starting this new company. And like, you just have no choice, but you gotta, you've got to make it successful because you've got this pressure on you to do so.
So it's interesting that you're this DJ, so that'll help you in your communications, right? And then building PCs, which will give you a technical experience of kind of taking things from scratch, and then you have to sell them. So again, you're learning how to market, and it's kind of like direct sales, right? So that's tough. So you got the elements, though, the different elements, and then you serve as a senior manager in global business development, applied biosystems, right? What you mentioned, and that would give you some more experience. But on the healthcare side, you founded Excel Laboratories, so that would give you. So I could see the healthcare element as well.
Right, right.
And then you manage global sales at Signet Laboratories. So again, all of these kind of healthcare areas, and then biogenics laboratories. What made you interested in healthcare?
It was, my degree in biology was, and it's funny because even to this day, I was thinking to myself, like, it's the most fascinating place to be, right? It's just, no, because you can learn and keep learning. And biology is not going to stop, right? And there's a million things we don't know. So we're always learning something new. And whatever we're learning, whatever we're doing, ultimately at some point comes back and has an impact on the human condition. So it, you can see the life cycle from the research all the way to an application, and you're learning and having fun. At least I am the whole time. So I really enjoy that part of healthcare and life sciences.
Right. And then you become, or you take on a position with Scientia advisors. Can you talk about that? What was that like?
Yeah, I had just left Applied Biosystems, and who became my co-founder at that time, Arshad Ahmed, he comes to me and says, "Hey, let's do this consulting thing." I said, I don't want to do this. And I said, no, give it a try. So I'll give it a try until I find a job. And we, sold the first project, and then we sold the second one, and and then all of a sudden we're like, at some point I'm like, we're 13 people. I look around, I'm like, okay, well, I think this is what I want to be doing. And then we grew the company to about 40 people, and then sold it to a private equity group that was doing a roll-up. So a good 8-year run from start to sale.
And now, so tell me what you're doing now.
So now I made a hard left turn into finance. We ended up creating a platform that could read scientific publications to figure out A, how science interacts, but B, where the science was going to move next. And then at one point, we thought, well, it's working so well, I wonder if it'll work that well in finance. And so we ended up shifting the platform into finance, and we built a foundational finance language model from the ground up. So think ChatGPT, but only for finance. And we ended up, now we're out there and we're marketing it to asset managers, hedge funds, and large financial institutions to sort of streamline a lot of the work that they do.
And what it does is it covers what patterns and trends and things like that, or it gives you insight.
What we ended up doing was because we built the system from the ground up on top of the language model, what we can do is we can actually understand the concepts that they're talking about in the language, quantify that. And so you can actually see how the company is changing how they're talking about different concepts that would either drive risk up or drive risk down. And so, in science, if you can't measure it, like, it's probably not important, right? Otherwise, we'd figure out a way to measure it. What we've done is come up with a way to measure language and the concepts within the language to understand how that's changing over time, so that you can see how that impacts how the company is managed, how risk is rising or falling, and then how that correlates to things like their stock price or some other metric that you might be interested in.
And then when you do sort of follow-up analysis of the kind of capabilities of your system, do you have sort of a metric of how successful it is?
Yeah. So we go through and we've been back testing it, constantly to see, will the different metrics correlate to how the stock moves, which there are a number of them that do. Or like we just actually did a unique thing, which was we took all the quantitative data with the qualitative data, and we're able to actually forecast more accurately where people are going to land with their earnings or their gross margins. So much better than sort of say a human can do, because the machine can actually do all the quantitative work, take all of our qualitative, and together build a model that can do a better job of forecasting than most, if not all, humans can do across any public company in the universe.
Now, you indicated that you trained your own models. So you mean from scratch, or taking an existing sort of utility and then adding your layers? No,
Scratch. So, got a transformer, assembled all the data, trained it from the bottom up, and then understood very quickly that we needed to get to every sub-industry, because if you and I start bantering biotech, we start talking in a language that most people may not understand. So we actually then trained 70 submodels on each sub-industry that we could put it all together. And so now it understands that dialect in every little sub industry to get to that nuanced layer.
And then let's say there's an asset manager out there who says, oh, that's really interesting. So they get onboarded, and how do they use your service?
So we have both a quant and a qual, function they can access. But let's assume they access the website. They can understand what management is saying. They can see how management is talking about different concepts and how those concepts are changing over time. They can understand where risk is emerging or decreasing in the company. And then, as I said, we've actually created models where we've taken a number of these factors and put them together to tell them, is the company being truthful when they talk to the market? How do they compare to their peers? Or, where will they land from an earnings perspective or gross margin perspective in the next quarter based on their quantitative as well as what is management saying? So it puts somebody who's good on steroids because they can do it, an order of magnitude faster than having to consume all the material and then synthesize it in their head.
So what made you think of this idea? Because your whole background is kind of in life sciences and not financial services, right? So that's quite a strength, right?
Yes. To be honest, it was, it came to the point where at some point I used to be able to, I knew every gene, what it affected, what was going on. I mean, you could keep track of this stuff, right? And then at some point that started to get so big and the number of papers coming out are so much that it's just impossible for the human brain to see the patterns, right? And so I thought, can we build a platform from the ground up that could actually read the papers, understand the concepts, show me how they all interact, and then show me where the next one was going to move. And then once we built that, then we thought, all right, let's try this in finance. Now, I would tell you from the first model we built, the second model is where we added the language model component, because at that point, OpenAI had done what they had done. And we said, whoa, there's a better way to build this mousetrap. And so we took everything we learned in the science side and we combined it with the language model, and the two together give us capabilities that some of the existing language models, from what I've seen, cannot do or aren't designed to do, let's say.
So when you did your own language model, did you take something like an open source model as a core and then build on it? Or did you just absolutely create one from scratch, like Meta creates one from scratch, or Anthropic?
We took one of the available transformers, and then we ran all of our data through the transformer and then went from there. I think the hardest part was getting our hands on the right platforms to do all that work. And luckily we were connected with a few people who got us access to the right platforms to do that.
So you're using something called retrieval augmented generation, or something even more fundamental than that?
No, we're not using a RAG at all. When we built the model, the way that we built the model and then the tech stack, like I said, that follows after that, is we're able to understand the concepts that we're looking for. And then because we understand the concepts, we can actually, the system understands where to go and pull the right data from the language model. And we can actually trace it back to the sentence level to tell you where that information came from. So it's fully traceable and verifiable in the source material, as opposed to ChatGPT, which sort of can't really tell you exactly where it got the information from. And a RAG will only tell you the document. It won't tell you the sentence that it used to create the paragraph.
Now, software is difficult to patent, but is this patentable?
There are certain aspects that are patentable, and we've been filing. It's just being strategic about what you're filing on that makes our system so unique and so different from everybody else's.
It's a really interesting concept. Uh, are you in the micro? I think you're using the Microsoft tech stack or something like that, or not? No, you're not. Okay.
No, no. We started out with Amazon and Snowflake and a couple of these other ones. And then as much as we possibly can, we've brought certain pieces in-house.
Right.
And that's simply to just manage speed and cost and our ability to sort of not have somebody else change something on us and not understand what, how things are going to evolve in the future.
Right. So you're doing a lot of this on premise, which is interesting. So shit.
Yeah.
So that's fascinating. So what's your hope that how's your go-to-market strategy on this? How do you get people aware that this is this is one way, right? You're going to get the word out. We're having a conversation on it, but how are you getting the word out to the community out there?
We've been knocking on a lot of doors and trying to get feedback on the system and make improvements as we go. We're out there trying to raise money so that we can hire people that have those the next level connections. I mean, one of the things that we want to do right now is you can imagine that with all of this that we've done, we've generated quite a bit of incredibly high quality, clean data. And what we're ready to do now is run the next version of our language model. And so that would be one of the goals I'd like to do in this next raise, is not just start market and sell what we built, but raise enough money to run the next model. If the model follows the same trajectory as we've seen with other models out there, I'm expecting sort of an order of magnitude improvement in the capabilities of that model.
So this is an interesting juncture in your career, right? Because, and we didn't mention that you're a general partner with Scientia Ventures, and before doing that, you're entrepreneur in residence at GE Ventures, and leading to the founding of Evidation Health and Drawbridge Health, and you serve on public boards like State Zero Life Sciences and Drumroll Health, which is private. But it's interesting, you got all of this activity, and then of course you've done a lot of keynotes, things like that on major news services, and speaking before the National Institutes of Health and the Molecular Medicine Tri-Conference, et cetera. So it's interesting you segued into this new venture, right?
Yeah, originally, like I said, I mean, I really thought we were going to build this platform and we were going to use it for making better investment decisions. And then once we made this right turn into finance or fintech, I realized you really got to dedicate all your time to doing this. So we raised a little bit of money. And myself and the team have been fully dedicated to building out the platform and then starting to get it in front of people so that we can take it to the next level. But if as we raise money, I also want to start hiring more people that have that fundamental fintech and finance understanding to build out the team and build out that muscle.
So we're going to kind of change direction. So I've already alluded to this, right? You're definitely out there speaking, and as I mentioned, the National Institutes of Health, the Molecular Medicine Conference, the World Theranostics Congress, and you authored articles in publications. You appeared on CBS Evening News. You quoted regularly by the Dow Jones, the Boston Globe, BioWorld Today, Los Angeles Times. It's kind of like endless, London Independent, Medical Daily, Science Magazine, Genetic Engineering News, and so on. And you've authored these books. So let's now talk about the book. So you got this whole kind of media side, right? So what led you to write the first book, and tell me about that book and what inspired it? Then tell me about the second book you wrote, and then the third book, and then you can talk about maybe some upcoming books. So now let's get into this book part of your career.
Sure. So the first book was pretty straightforward, and it was a textbook. I realized at that point that there was no textbook on commercializing diagnostic products. You just sort of, you almost had to apprentice in it to understand how to do it. And so I thought, all right, I'll write a textbook on how to do this. And so got together with a publisher, and that was pretty straightforward because you really had to follow. There is a formula to doing this, right? You have to check the boxes and understand, like, regulatory, where do you fall? How are you going to market it? What do you need to do from a trials perspective, et cetera? And so that was pretty straightforward. I think that took 9-10 months to sort of put together, right? Because there was no creativity in that, in a sense of, let me think of the future and what's going to happen next. And that book did well, because there was nobody. If you entered the space, there was nobody that was going to say, "Hey, do this," or "Here's the checklist." And then it was at one point that I realized, and I think this goes back to building PCs and understanding what was going on. The Reinvestment and Recovery Act had passed, and now they were going to push everybody to EMRs. So now all of a sudden, all this data was going to get digitized. Well, the minute you digitize all this data, you can actually analyze it. And if you can analyze it, then everything is going to change. And so the first book was Moneyball Medicine. And it was all about how data was going to change the practice of medicine, drug development, and life sciences, and where that was going to have an impact and why it was going to have an impact. And it was written more for people in the industry than for the average layperson. And then the third book was making a lot of that material much more accessible for the average person. And that book was called The Future You. And it was about AI and data, wearables, and where the technologies were going, and how the average person should be incorporating this into their life, because it would give them information and empower them in a way that could keep them healthier, and help them understand how to manage themselves better.
Right. So, you talk about the Moneyball medicine book, and then the Future You and AI and how that could make you healthier. And then you have this commercialization novel, IBDs, this manual for success. So it's interesting. Do you have another book in mind?
Yeah, I'm vacillating between, do I go much deeper into and move out into the future of where AI and healthcare are going to intersect, but more for the consumer rather than the industry? Or I'm thinking more of, doubling down into the entrepreneurship side, and, what does it really take to be an entrepreneur and drive a company forward, drive an idea forward, and be successful in that space. So those are the two that I keep playing with. Although my wife looks at me and goes, I thought you said you weren't going to write another book. So I don't know if childbirth is gone long enough for me to forget the experience of the last one to write the next one.
But really, that's now a natural catalyst for the next two questions. So the next question is, what does it take to succeed as an entrepreneur? What are the things that you need to do and think about? And, what are the qualities that make for successful entrepreneurship? And then we'll stop there, and then we'll go further to the AI space.
No, sure. I think you just have to be stubborn, perseverant, a little crazy. That always helps. Very committed to sort of where you think you need to go to. I think you just have to be tenacious, and you have to be comfortable with getting punched and brushing it off and getting up the next day and sort of doing it again. And it's interesting because when I was younger, I didn't fully appreciate or realize that, where now I know when it's happening. And I have to be more mindful of saying, get up, brush it off, move on. I think when I was younger, it just, you just did it. You didn't have to think about it. And now I do think about it, you get up and you realize like, okay, I just got rejected 5 times. You know, what adjustments do I need to make? And we'll go at it another 5 times. Until you get to that yes. And once you get the first yes, you realize what the formula is and you can start driving more yeses.
Yeah, a friend of mine, Anthony Stefan, who's a white viewer, by the way, he has his favorite phrase, and that is, he says that a no is a yes with conditions, right? Which is true, right? And I guess that's the resilience and agility and kind of working through the volatility. A lot of entrepreneurs don't, or a lot of new entrepreneurs or thinking about, don't realize it's really chaotic. And you got to live through that chaos, right? And that's just the norm. I guess there's these Steve Blank's, the 9 levels of investment readiness levels. So it's the kind of basic principles, make sure you have your business plan out in some way. You've done some competitive analysis. You definitely have a problem and a solution. You do an MVP, make sure your product market, these kind of 9 steps that are sort of concrete. But then you're talking about the intangibles, and that is that right through the chaos, the volatility, you have to be persistent, optimistic throughout all of that. You just keep going and going. And it's certainly not a 9 to 5. You can't have this kind of, I don't believe you can have home life, work-life balance as a startup.
No, there's no such thing. I was funny because I remember earlier people would talk about work-life balance, and I'm like, I would be like, I would be struggling with that. And then I remember reading something about life is about priorities. And if that thing is a priority to you, everything else, it just gets downgraded. So it's trying to balance it is in an entrepreneurial venture. I just don't think it's possible. You either give it 100% or you don't.
Yeah. And I saw this piece with an executive, and it sort of got leaked and it got taken off the internet. But this whole point being an executive mentioning that maybe their company isn't succeeding, is successful, but could succeed more. People didn't think about work-life balance as much. And then there's this other news of another major company where the employees work like 2 a.m. in the morning. And it's not even a startup. It's an established tech company, but the reason it's so successful is because these employees are, they're working really, really hard. And there isn't any way around it. Right.
No, I mean, you have to find what that path is, and then you've gotta drive down that path, and that's the hardest part is finding that first kink in the armor so that you can push your way through.
Yeah, and you have to make your choice. If you want to prioritize family, then spend only 35-hour weeks, then you're probably a startup. It's not something that you should go for, right? It's probably a standard corporate job, and those are all viable choices, right? You have to decide what your viable alternatives are.
No, I mean, I think it's a personality issue. I do think that entrepreneurship is somewhat of a disease because you keep doing it over and over again, right?
Yeah, it's in your blood or it's in your DNA or something like this, right? Okay, so
Correct.
One topic of a book, and we covered that, the entrepreneurship side. The other one was kind of mining deeper AI. And since you're so heavily involved in AI, you definitely understand it, you're applying it, and very few people are actually building their own models, basically like you are at the level you are. Where is it going? Where is this AI? You think the scaling laws apply? So the scaling laws are you put more compute, you optimize the data, you add more of this optimized data, you use synthetic data, you go multimodal, and you just keep doing that. It just gets better and better and better. Do you think that scaling law is going to continue to apply? You had had the Anthropic CEO say, this thing could go through the roof as long as the scaling laws apply, right? So what are your feelings about this? Are the scaling laws going to continue for the foreseeable future, or this going to go through the roof? And through the roof means everybody's going to be impacted. There's not a person on the planet that won't be impacted.
That I believe is a given, right? That final statement of everybody. So it was interesting, right? So, if you think about AI, well, I go back to like algorithms and, different forms of machine learning and all the stuff that's been written about for, I don't know, a long time, right? But you always knew that you needed this really sharp individual that was going to do this work and that they were going to produce something, and it was going to be, and your data was going to be the most important thing to drive it, and off you were going to go, right? And then all of a sudden we have this language model that gets created where anyone can now interact with this thing, this platform. And it was that moment when I had that moment, right? And I remember thinking, I need to take a class on this. Like, I need to understand this. And I signed up for a class and went down to New York, and there was a YPOer that actually taught that course. And we started playing with it. And literally for 10 hours, I was in that, oh my God, like this is going to really like change a bunch of stuff. Fast forward, I talked to a lot of other YPOers, and they're like, it's like a tool. It's just like I don't know, like Excel or Word. And I'm like, Excel and Word don't talk back to me. I can't have a conversation with Excel and Word. And so going to your scaling laws, I can see how that will continue in a certain way. And I think like synthetic data also is going to play somewhat of a role in that. But from what I'm, picking up from everybody, I'm talking about that there's going to be a limitation to what you're really going to be able to do with that. And if you want to get to the next level, there's going to be some other methodologies that are going to now move to that next, help us move to that next level of logic, math, etc. And now what I will tell you, I don't want to say I'm worried, but is interesting is I believe there's a lot of work that is not being published anymore. So up till now, you could sort of read and get an idea of what everybody was doing. I do believe that there's a bunch of fundamental work that isn't making it into a publication that will be that next step up. I think it's called, what is OpenAI working on? Strawberry, something called Strawberry, if I'm not mistaken.
It used to be called Q Sharp, and then it became Strawberry.
Yeah, and I believe that there's going to be some shifts away from what we think of as a standard language model infrastructure that will allow it to probably do math better and to follow logical steps better. And so I can see that the minute you go down that road, all of a sudden it really opens up what you can do with these platforms. And there's a lot of people that I know in the space that are working on this, and you can see they're having the big moment, right? Because they could see where it's going. I mean, Stefan, the fact that I can just get on Claude today and ask it to write a Tetris program for me, and the next thing I know, I'm playing Tetris, and I say, oh no, change that to yellow, change that to red, and it automatically lets me do that. It's empowering me, who doesn't code, to be able to do things or get it to a point where now I can hand it to someone who's an expert and say, hey, can you polish this off for me? Now, before, that would take me, what, months? I want it to look like this, and I want it to do this. And then I was expecting by like telepathy, the person to understand and give me what I want. Now I can, in 30 minutes, I can iterate through a cycle, create something that's, yeah, that's sort of what I was thinking. And then if I want to give it to somebody to polish off. But does that mean that the next version, I don't need to give it to the next person to polish off? Like it'll be done? the empowerment of each individual to have this incredible system at their fingertips, I think, is being underestimated by at least the vast majority of the people that I interact with.
Yeah, I mean, it's really fascinating. There was a paper came out earlier this year where they applied this well-known knowledge graph theory to try to make sense of what large language models are doing, and kind of summarize what the paper is basically saying is that there's something novel happening and within these things, right? So it's more than just the parrot. There's something novel and recombination of things into new skills. I thought that was really interesting. And then you see this maybe drop about a week and a half ago, or maybe within the past week, this AI scientist paper, which is a large language model. And it can actually brainstorm, design an experiment, conduct experiment, analyze the results, write a paper, and then it has this automated assessment tool that says, hey, how good is the paper? And it can go into a loop. It's already writing papers. It only costs about $50 to write a paper. And it's already being applied to 3 subdomains of machine learning. That is transformers, diffusion models, and then some kind of learning contextual system. But the framework could be applied to physics or biology. And this is the first edition, and it could do novel things. And there's a suggestion that the papers are strong enough that you maybe use it at a top conference. It won't be the best paper, but it'll make it. And this is just the first iteration. Or I do these private summits, and I created there's that pseudo music generation thing, and then I animated it with a DID technology. So you actually had a person that looked like a person singing, and it's all artificial. I even created the image of a person artificially, so it wasn't a real person, animated it using DID's lip syncing technology, and then applied it to pseudo, which created the lyrics, the music. And so, I mean, if we went 4 years ago, people would have said that was impossible, right?
Well, if you've noticed, whenever we achieve something with one of these systems, and you start talking to somebody, what was considered super important before we achieved it now is not as important. Right? So they rationalize it down to, oh, that's just, yeah, okay, whatever. But 3 weeks before that, had I told you, you would have said, oh my God, that would be amazing. Now it's not so amazing anymore. And, I just think about the rate of change of these systems and how quickly will they release. I actually think they'll hold stuff back rather than release the greatest thing they have immediately, because the impact to society, I think, could be detrimental depending on what is released.
Yeah, I mean, there's this new processes now, right? There's a UK AI Safety Institute, and then there's also one associated with NIST, the National Institute for Standards and Technology, and then they have a U.S. Safety Institute that's part of that NIST. And this is the standard body for the U.S. right? So, and interestingly enough, they're requiring now that any of the big companies, before they release the model, they actually have to share it with NIST, and NIST has to go through it. And that's a requirement. So Strawberry or Too Sharp is actually in NIST's hands right now before it gets released. So that's interesting that this other layer has now happened, right? Because let's just make sure that the safeguards are there, and it's not going to have this disruptive impact, and so it speaks.
Well, it's interesting. I'm not. Go ahead. I'm sorry.
I mean, it speaks to your comment, right? We're not really seeing the latest and greatest things, and maybe they are going to be delayed, right? So,
but it's interesting to me that people think they can project or see where the impact is going to be, and as human beings, we're historically horrible at predicting the impact of something. The other thing that I find interesting is, the cat's out of the bag. China's not submitting their model to NIST, right? So they're not going to slow down, as well as every 16, 17, 18-year-old that's playing, that's, combining pieces to create the next thing, they're not submitting it to NIST either. So I find all these pieces conceptually interesting that everybody's talking about, but I do wonder about people's ability to project where this is going to go, because Stephen, think about it. We're going from a methodology of thinking about computer science and technology from data, input, output, to an inferencing thought process. And everybody that was trained here is going to have a doggone hard time mentally going here. And so I that's where I see, like, there's these challenges that go on, because I hear heads of technology groups saying, I totally understand this AI thing. Whoa, time out. This thing came out when? And you really, like, fully understand this whole thing complete. And the guys who are working on it barely understand what's going on, let alone you read a paper and you automatically, this is where I'm sort of struggling with. I said in my book, the difference between evolution and revolution is time. If you let enough time go by, it's evolutionary. If all of a sudden that time scale collapses, it's revolutionary. And so I think the turns that are happening and the things that are happening are moving so quickly. I'm not sure that most people spend enough time, like, really absorbing it to understand what the implications of these shifts are.
Yeah, then they combine it with the convergence of things like the chip technologies. There's a new kind of chip called CRAM coming out, like just came out. And, you have this Tai Chi photonic chip, and then you have quantum computing, you have biomedical innovation, you have all of the convergence of all of this, and just everything accelerating. But that'll be another conversation, but there's a lot going on. And, but I want to pick up on something you said earlier. You said YPO. A lot of the audience doesn't know what YPO is. What is YPO? And are you a YPO member?
Answering the second question, yes, I'm a YPOer. What is YPO? The term stands for Young Presidents Organization. I'm not as young as I was when I first joined, but it was formed under the premise of CEOs needed other CEOs to discuss their companies, their lives, their families, their any issue under the sun with each other, because who were you going to commiserate? You had to have somebody that understood, like, the shoes you walk in. And so I joined when I was building the consulting firm. And you have meetings and you have educationals, but I would say one of the most valuable aspects of YPO is something called a forum, where you are put together with 7, 8, 9 other CEOs, and you would get together once a month or once every 6 weeks, whatever the cadence is. And when you get together, those individuals become your, personal board of directors. And you can talk about business, you can talk about personal, you can talk about anything. And they're not allowed to give you their opinion or tell you what to do. What the premise of the whole thing is hopefully they will share an experience that they have, and you could learn something from their experience. And actually, it's funny because I've incorporated that into my life. I try not to tell people what to do or give them advice, but more share experiences, and that tends to land better with most individuals.
Yeah, or you could ask clarifying questions, right? So you're talking about the Young Presidents Organization, but you're not 40 or 45. So how is that possible that you look older, maybe a little bit, 46?
Unfortunately, I've always looked older, but So I'm in, so at the age of 50, you matriculate to, let's call it the gold chapter. And so I'm part of gold chapter, but still obviously very active in actually building companies. And actually, my entire forum is super active. They're not, um, they don't fall into, I think, the old idea of gold. Um, and so you can be in gold until for as long as you choose. And I like staying in it because of the people you interact with, my forum, and the sort of people that you meet, like yourself and others through the organization.
Yeah, and because I've interviewed so many people with YPO, so this information is public, so there's this kind of privacy thing with YPO. So I'll just give some little bit of background, only because it's here already. I mean, there's 36,000 YPOers. They're in something like 500 chapters, close to it, over 150 countries, employing 22 million. And in 2018-19, when YPO 3.0 came out, there was this idea that it was 9 trillion in annual repeat revenue, something like it combined. But I would imagine, because it's 36,000, it was about 27,000 then. That's probably like 12 or 15 trillion in annual repeat revenue. So that's a considerable force. So this is kind of public knowledge, and you kind of piece together different YPOers talking. And you have to have a minimum requirement, which is on the website, right, to get in. You have to be pretty successful just to get in. So
It's yes, it's they have I think number of different factors. I haven't looked at what the latest ones are, but it's usually a certain size of a company, a certain revenue, a certain company, certain factors that you need to meet to be able to join. Um, it, it it was funny because one of the guys I sat on a board with said to me, "Who do you commiserate with when you have a problem?" I'm like, "Well, the mirror, me, myself, right?" Because as much as my wife loves me, she doesn't want to hear about this all the time. So he goes, "Oh, you need to join YPO." And he convinced me. And every once in a while, I go to an event or something happens and I'll text him and I'll say, "Thank you." Because I got to experience something or go through something that I would never have had I not been part of the organization.
yeah, I mean, I just came back from India, and I was asked to be the speaker at a YPO, but it was a YPO EO event. And I was the speaker. That's it. I mean, I keynoted for about an hour, did an hour Q&A. So it's like 2 hours. Uh, it was interesting though. EO is the Entrepreneurs Organization. And it was interesting to see the Entrepreneurs Organization versus the YPO organization, because there are differences, even though there's overlap. And at least in India, a lot of the entrepreneur organization members are also YPOers. So it's kind of this cross pollination. So I thought that was interesting. Undergoing that and just seeing the differences as well. So, but a lot of similarities, right? Uh,
Right.
well, it's an amazing organization. I'm not a YPO. I'm what you call a resource, so I get invited in to help in different ways and things like that. But I've done a lot over the years trying to help this organization. I do pro bono, by the way.
Yep.
So the including I cover most of my travel. Well, most of the time I'll do pro bono plus I cover all my expenses as well. So, um, and some people wonder why I do that. It's because then I don't get into conflict of interest. I do so much, so to manage that, then I just don't take any funding or anything like that. But what I've learned, it's an amazing community. That's a very powerful relationship, right? So
Yeah, I mean, I meet the most fascinating people who are running businesses, and I mean, I swear, every once in a while, I'm like, "There's a business that does that," and you start learning about it, and it's just fascinating. Uh,
yeah.
which is also, if you want to know on the ground in Ukraine,
Yeah.
there's YPOers that are there that will tell you like what's happening on the ground. So you can understand and geopolitically or economically or things like that that would be difficult through other methodologies.
Yeah, I mean, I probably spend as much time recommending YPOers to other YPOers. Because somebody will come in, I'll get an inbound meaning somebody doing a request. They'll say, Stephen, I got this problem. Can you help? I can, but there's another YPO right here that's in your field. So why don't I just join you? I'll just introduce you to, and then even though you have the ability to get in touch with anybody within the organization, but as you mentioned, it's very maybe form chapter centric or something like that, right? So you may not be aware of all the activity that's going on, right? So,
Yeah, technically, if you get something from a YPO, the rule is like 24 hours, right? You should be getting back to them, right? Unfortunately, everybody doesn't follow this rule, but that is how you're supposed to reciprocate to another member.
yeah. So anyways, I spend a lot of time if I meet a young entrepreneur and I think they're successful enough, I encourage them to join a YPO or to become a YPO. And then because I know so many YPOers and they need some kind of champion that'll introduce them to a champion or somebody who can mentor them. I think it's a marvelous organization. I didn't really know they existed. I mean, I had partners before who were YPOers, but never really understood the organization until a few years ago when I was asked to try to help them on various areas and got to really know the organization fairly well. So I definitely recommend it. I'm very, very much an advocate for entrepreneurs. And I think it speaks to you as a person that you're part of this organization and you're an active contributor and you're still an operator. So you might be a gold, but you're still an operator, right? So an operator,
No, thank you.
somebody who's still operating a company, or, co-founding, founding CEO or something like that, active in a company. So we're down to our last few minutes now, Harry. What recommendations would you want to leave the audience, or what questions do you want to leave the audience? So it could be both or one or the other.
I mean, one of the things because I've been giving talks on AI and different things like that, and what I tell everybody is, if you're not playing with it, play with it. Right? Play with it every day if you can. Push the envelope with it. Get familiar with it because you're never going to really understand it unless you start pushing the envelope and playing with it. And it is, I believe it's going to have a much larger effect on people and work than I think most people have written about or talked about. That would be the first thing, because I think that will have an impact on you, your kids, your grandkids, and everybody else that around you. Stefan, I don't know about any questions. I probably have way too many questions. I've got 18 tabs open on my thing of all the things I need to read that I found over the weekend that I have to go back to. So I'm always trying to ask my own questions and answer questions by keeping up to speed and reading. But it's fascinating the way that things are moving. It's just I find it exhilarating and every once in a while terrifying.
That's interesting. So, I mean, you're indicating that AI and machine learning is going to have a profound impact, and people need to really seriously research and think about the implications, and then embed it if they're able to in some systematic way. That's what I'm reading. Right? You can't ignore it. You can't push it aside. Otherwise, you could be like some of the companies that are out there that are going to clobber. Right? And then I guess the other thing is you indicated you got all these tabs open, which means you're curious. And so make sure you maintain the curiosity, you're active learning, right? And I did an hour fireside with Vinod Khosla and an interview with him. And he spends several hours a day, or that's my impression anyways, reading on the outlier, kind of on the edge. And Vinod Khosla is one of the most successful investors and founder entrepreneurs of all time. And he's made the Forbes Midas list, which is the list of the top investors 17 times, including this year again, which is pretty good. He's not, he's a little bit older gentleman, and yet he still retains that. So, and that speaks to your curiosity, right? That you got all these tabs open and you're actively reading and you're writing. And even your wife is saying, "Are you going to do another book?" So, um, so quite remarkable. You definitely stand out in terms of your productivity and your curiosity and your active contributions in so many different areas. So, thank you for spending the time with me. I mean, we could have continued for another hours here, because I could have gone into some of the other sort of translational areas that we're getting into, and because you're so well read and you have such a great background, could have explored all of them. But they're just, unfortunately, we're limited in time here. But amazing interview, really enjoyed it. Just amazing to be introduced to you and just follow what you're doing as well. It's quite remarkable.
You're very kind. Thank you very much. It was great. And hopefully, if you're on this coast or I'm on that coast, we can actually get together in person and continue the conversation. There's some fascinating things that are happening, and it would be interesting to trade notes.
Yeah, I mean, I guess you don't have access to Strawberry yet. But some people do.
No, I'm dying to see how it handles logic, certain parts of math.
This is supposed to be better.
And I believe it's supposed to be much better. And I believe that it will have the ability to, I hate to use the word think, but I can't think of a better word, but it will be able to, once you ask it a question, I think it'll be able to think further in the background, come back to you later and say, I was thinking about this. And oh, by the way, these are some things that didn't come up in the first interaction.
Yeah,
I think it's going to move from a question answer to what you would do with a human being, which is question, think about it, and come back with something more thoughtful.
Yeah, it's like you can give it a project and it'll go off and do it. Right. Rather than you to prompt it, it'll just go off and do it, which is remarkable.
Yes.
That's at least that's the appearance. We don't know until it kind of publicly gets available, but that's what it sounds like.
Correct. Yeah. So
yeah, I mean, it's a pretty exciting times. You're in the middle of this, so let's watch what Harry's doing, because Harry's a big contributor.
Thank you.
Okay, well, thank you for taking the time, and you take care. Really enjoyed this.
Thank you very much. I appreciate it.
Thank you for listening to the Brand Called You videocast and podcast, a platform that brings you knowledge, experience, and wisdom of hundreds of successful individuals from around the world. Do visit our website www.tbcy.in to watch and listen to the stories of many more individuals. You can also follow us on YouTube, Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter. Just search for the Brand Called You.